as I said, after the reading I was going to open up to a brief Q&A session, so does anyone have any questions about the book or publishing or...
Which hours of the 24 did you write?
Well, as I said, I was writing while I was studying at uni, so I used to often write in the mornings before I left, and then in the evenings. It depended on what my hours at uni were. I have to admit, I often did actually write during exam periods, which is a bit naughty. But I really did need a creative outlet to survive when, you know, it was endless. There's a few other law students here, they know what it's like when you're drowning in case law and legislation. Anybody else? That's it.
How long's the whole period did it take?
Actually, I have a funny way of writing. I know some people sort of write slowly and perfect everything as they go. I tend to churn out a first draft very quickly, and then I will either discard it or I will work on it. I tend to view a first draft as like a sort of lump of clay, and it's misshapen and horrible, but I churn it out quickly, and then I spend ages sculpting it to try and make it shiny and pretty.
What's the next book called?
I don't know yet. I really don't know. I'm actually waiting my editor, and we're going to be sorting that out very soon, because it should be coming out at the start of next year. There's 3 of them. I have written them all, but they don't have titles. They're coming out hopefully on a roughly 6-monthly basis, so early next year and then mid next year should be the next 2.
Do you prefer to write more and prune, or write the bones and flesh out?
I tend to overwrite, so my first draft will often, say for a YA book like this that should be sitting at around 80,000 words, my first draft will probably be about 100,000 words, and then I have to brutally take a chainsaw to it and just hack it to death. So I admire people who can write sort of sparse, elegant prose. I tend to just regurgitate everything onto the page and then hack it. So yeah. Anything else?
Any particular influences you'd say are more notable than others? I got a bit of almost Ghibli kind of feel to that. Studio Ghibli.
As I said, I read so many fantasy books when I was a kid that I think I sort of, they really became a part of me. I was one of those little bookworms who'd go to the local library and come home on a Saturday with this Brooke is nodding, she remembers, my sister. I would come home with a massive stack of books and just curl up on the couch and devour them. And my favourite books I'd read again and again. So I don't think it was any particular book that was an influence. It was more a lifetime of being, you know, enveloped in that sort of world of fantasy and magic, and it all just sort of came out, I suppose. Any other questions?
What was the first word you had to ask one of your parents for the meaning of when you were reading?
Oh, I don't know. When I was a kid, actually, most of my vocabulary I learnt just by reading. You know, you sort of absorb by osmosis just because you read and you see the words in context and they start to make sense to you. Unlike my mum, who I know when she was a kid used to read the dictionary for fun. But hey, now she's head of English, so it paid off. Sorry, Mum. But when I was a very little kid, like a toddler, I will admit this is a bit embarrassing, but when I was sort of 2, my favourite word was residue, because it had 3 syllables and it sounded very impressive. So whenever we went to the shops, I'd be like, if we eat lots of that, we might have residue. We can eat it again tomorrow. So that was my favourite word when I was a little kid that I think probably Mum had to explain that to me, so that's probably what the first one.
When it comes to publishing, did you send it off to your manuscript to a number of publishers, or did you just pick one?
I was actually very fortunate in that I had an agent. So I submitted it to, I queried my agent actually with a different manuscript quite a few years ago, back in 2009. And I was fortunate enough that he took me on the basis of that manuscript, and then things happened and other manuscripts happened and it all got a bit convoluted. But last year he sent Chasing the Valley to Random House, and I was extremely fortunate, and I'm so happy and grateful to have this opportunity that they picked it up. It's honestly, it's beyond anything I could have hoped for. It's just incredible what's been happening. Are there any other questions? Or?
Yes, what was the title? Did you choose the title?
Yeah, it was. That was actually its working title. It was always called Chasing the Valley.
It's rather ambiguous.
It is. It is in reference to some clues. When you actually read, if you end up reading the book, there are. So I'm getting some nods from people who've read. Yeah, there are some clues that the main characters have to sort of decipher, and hidden little twists and things, and it will make sense. There was actually a period where we considered changing the title while it's going through the publication process, and then we ended up switching back again. So.
When's the movie coming out?
In my daydreams or in reality? Yeah, no. Look, I'm just thrilled that it's even come out as a book. As I said, I've always been a book nerd, so you know, I'm not holding my breath, but whatever happens, happens, and I'm just thrilled with what's happening, for lack of a better word. That was not very articulate, was it? I should be better as a writer.
Skye, how do you write? Do you use your handwriting? Do you use an iPad, computer? How do you actually get all your information?
I would like to say that I write by sitting at, a mahogany desk under a window, countryside outside, a typewriter. In reality, I sit on the couch with an iPad. It's not that classy, but...
Are the characters based on anyone in real life?
I've been asked that a couple of times tonight, and as before I said no, and if they were, I wouldn't tell you. No, they're really not. I don't know if that's more worrying, they all just came out of my head, but... No, there's, especially not the villains, are not based on anybody I have ever met. No resemblance to real life intended. What's the disclaimer on movies? I'll go with that.
Time-wise, what's the time setting? Is it, talk about biplane?
Well, it's a completely fictional world, so it's not set on Earth, but the technology level is equivalent to the very early 20th century, I'd say. So, but a lot of the technology, it's not based on electricity, it's based on alchemy, which sort of, it's a fantasy book, so, yeah. Sandra?
Yeah, so under title there's a small phrase there.
Yeah.
Did it take long to come up with that, or was that always in mind?
I can't take credit for that. Zoe Walton, who I mentioned before, came up with that. As far as I know, she came up with that little subtitle. For those who can't read it, it says, "Escape is impossible, escape is their only hope." So, yeah, so I can't take credit for that, unfortunately. Do you know?
When you write, do you have a plan, like do you know where you're heading, or do you just kind of start and go where it's going?
I would like to say I'm one of these writers who plans out meticulously and has this really detailed idea about where they're going, but in reality, I think, is it a Doctorow quote? It might be. There's a quote that says writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You don't need to see the whole way down the highway, you just as far as your street lights, just the next few meters ahead. So when I'm writing, I generally have a vague idea of where I'm immediately going, and I generally know what the very end point is, but the middle is a blank, and I just go there with the characters and see how I get to that end point. So it's actually a bit more fun for me that way as well, because I'm sort of going on an adventure with them, I guess. Oh, Selena?
Did you study at law help you with writing?
Selena's a law graduate. As I said, I sort of, partly what inspired me was human rights law. I think that's sort of where I got the sort of awful despotic government stuff from, to be honest, and the idea of people being displaced and having to flee their homeland. But apart from that, I can't say that contract law helped me a lot.
Did you write from a single character's perspective?
Yeah, it's first person, just from Danika's point of view.
Okay, interesting. Did you ever consider writing it from multiple characters?
I've written other manuscripts that are alternating points of view, but I generally write that in third person. When I try to write first person, multi-point of view, I tend to, I don't know, because each character has their own unique voice, it doesn't sort of flow as well, I find, just for me when I'm writing it, jumping from one to the other. So I prefer to write...
Do you find that disengaging when you read as well?
Not particularly. I might just be a quirk of how I write, in that if I'm writing first person, I prefer to just have one main character narrating. Whereas if I'm writing third person, I might have a chapter from one person's point of view, a chapter from another person's point of view, back and forth. Yeah. Is that it? Yeah. Okay. Well, that concludes the formal part of the evening then. Thank you for all of those who asked questions, and thank you all of you for coming. Everybody, I really appreciate your support, and I hope you all have a lovely evening.